friends, it's Christy, and I'm so happy to be back with you on the My Favorite Things YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the Let's Work Together stamp set. So I've stamped my images out in extreme black hybrid ink on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm starting with my fox, and for him I'm using YR12, YR14, and YR18. I like to color darkest to lightest, so I'm going to come in with that YR18 first and lay in some shadows down the back of his body, and also put in a little bit of a deeper shadow on the base of his tail where his body would be casting a shadow on that. And then I'm going to blend that out with my midtone, the YR14, making sure to really go over the edge of the YR18 to make sure everything is nice and smooth and I don't get any harsh lines. And then I will come in with my lightest shade, which is the YR12, and I'm going to fill in any remaining white space. For the white areas of his body, I want to add a little shading with YR000 and YR00, laid in the darker shade first, and then just blended that out with the lighter one and let that fade into the white. Then I'm moving down to my beaver, and I wanted to pick kind of some dull browns, something that would be different from the wood grain tones that I'll be using later. So I picked E42, E43, and E44 for him, and I'm laying his shadows in on the right hand side since he's facing toward the left, so that his face will have a nice highlight and the shadows will be on his back. I used the E44 first, and now I'm blending out with the E43. And then I'll come in with my lightest shade, the E42, and fill in the center of his face, also the rest of his little hands and his belly. For his tail, I'm going to keep the E44, but that's going to become my lightest shade now, and I added to that the E47 and E49. I used the E49 to add some shadow on the bottom edge and also define the artist drawn lines to give it that texture. Blended out with the E47 and then the E44. I also colored in the fox's book and one of the logs in the badger's wheelbarrow with those shades. And now I'm moving on to my badger. For him, I'm using W3, W5, and W7 for the black areas of his body, using that W7 first and adding that bit of shadow and creating that contrast. And then I'll come in with my midtone, which is the W5, and just blend over the edge of the W7 so I get those nice smooth blends, and then fill in the rest of that area with the W3, especially over his eye, so I can keep that nice and bright so you can see his personality clearly. And I forgot to do the other side of his face, so I'll go back in and color that in the same way, and then finish off his little hands as well. For the white parts of his body, I'm using W00 and W1, and laying in the W1 first and blending out with the W00 and letting that fade toward the white in the center. And then I used W9 to color in all three of the critter's noses and also the wheels on the wheelbarrow. I'm going to color the wheelbarrow in some teal shades. I picked BG72, BG75, and BG78. I put my darkest toward the badger where his body would be casting a shadow. Then I used Y13, Y15, and Y17 to color in some stripes on the beaver and fox's sweaters. I did a few more stripes on the fox's sweater with R11, R20, and R22. And I kind of just picked a few at random that were spaced pretty far apart, and used the R22 first, blended out with the R20, and used the R11 as my highlight shade. I'm also going to color in all three critters' rosy cheeks with the R20 and R11. So I use the R20 to do a little oval shape on the cheek area, and then I went around the edge of that with the R11 to really soften that up. I did a few more stripes on the fox's sweater with YG21, YG23, and YG25. I wanted his sweater to be really colorful and just reminiscent of like spring or summer, you know, just bright, happy shades. I did a brighter orange with YR04, YR07, and YR09. And then I'm going to do the badger sweater in my yellow combo once again, which is Y13, Y15, and Y17. And I just think this makes him look so dapper and gentlemanly. I just love this combination for him. For the wood, I'm going to use E23, E25, and E27 for the main area, and then E21 for any of the cut ends. So I use the E27 first to add a little shading to the underside and also to follow some of those artist drawn lines. And then I'm going to blend over that with the E25 and then fill in the rest with the E23. And then I will do the cut end with the E21 like I mentioned, and I'll do all the rest of the wood off screen. Except for the tree house. The tree house I wanted to be in a lighter shade as if this wood, you know, were milled, so it's the inside edge of the wood. So I picked E30, E31, and E33. So again, I'm just adding a little shading on the edges under the roof line and on those artist drawn lines, blending out with the E31 and then using that E30 for a little bit of highlight. I used BG11 for the window glass, and then for all of the leaves, I'm going to use G40, G43, and G46. I wanted there to be a bit of a more vibrant green that didn't show up on any other area on the card. So I'm going to do that on all of the leaves of the tree house and then also the other tree. And I will color in the ladder using just the G46. So for those leaves, I'm using that darkest shade, the G46, at the base of each leaf where it's connected to the tree branches, and then blending out with the G43 and saving a little bit of room on each of the tips for the G40 for a highlight. And I did do a second layer off screen on each of the leaves just to smooth out the blend and increase that saturation. Then I'll take a black gel pen and go over all of the critters' eyes to make them nice and bright and shiny again, which just really brings them to life. And I'll trim these images out with their coordinating dies. For my background, I'm going to use the Rolling Clouds stencil to create a cloudy sky on a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock using some Distress Oxide ink in tumbled glass. And as I'm applying that, I'm pressing down more firmly as I leave the stencil, so I get a higher concentration of color right on the edge, and then it kind of fades as it moves up the panel. And then I'll turn that stencil so I get a different formation of clouds and repeat that process. For the third one, I'm actually going to split it into two little sections. So I'm going to do one little one right underneath this cloud cluster here, and then I will move my stencil over to the right hand side and do another one. And I'll use whatever ink is left on my tool just at the bottom of the panel so it's not so stark white. Then I'm going to press a little bit of that ink onto my work surface and water that down. Pick that up with a small paintbrush and do a little splatter detail just to create a little extra texture and movement on the scene. Then I have two more panels that I've cut down with the Grassy Hills Die-namics, and I'm going to blend on some more Distress Oxide ink. The first shade that I'm going to use is Twisted Citron, and I'm going to apply that pretty heavily to the top part of each of these panels. So I'll do the smaller one first, and then I'm going to add it to the taller panel. And then to create some more depth, I'm going to add a second shade, and that is Mowed Lawn. And this time I'm going to come in from the bottom. I'm going to take that pretty high up because I really just want that lighter Twisted Citron to be at the very top of the grass. And then I'll apply it extra heavily at the bottom edges. And then for the second panel, that one is actually going to get tucked behind. So I'm just going to apply that heavily from the get-go so you can make sure that you get a little bit of that darker green on there. And then I'll go back to my Twisted Citron blender and just blend back over that to make sure everything is nice and smooth. Then I'll press a little bit of that Mowed Lawn onto my work surface. Pick that up with a paintbrush after I've watered it down and do a little more splatter so that everything matches for all of the panels. Once the cloudy background is dry, I'm going to pop that into my Misty so I can stamp my sentiment. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink because it lays so well over the Distress Oxides. So I stamped out "I love the friendship we've built." And then I'm popping a piece of craft cardstock that I have created a standard A2 size card with. So it's 4 1/4 tall by 5 1/2 wide. And I'm stamping the other two critters that I didn't use on the front and the sentiment that says, "Together we can do anything." Now I'm ready to adhere my focal panel to my card front, and that is going to cover the entire front of the card. And then I've added my two Grassy panels together, so I have them just at the right spacing that I want them, and then I'm going to glue those together onto the card front, and everything is going to be nice and flat. Then I'm going to choose a piece of pattern paper from the Woodgrain Whimsy 6x6 pad, and I'm flipping through until I find this darker wood. And then I'm going to trim that down with the A2 rectangle frames. It's the second largest. I can save that center portion for another card. I'm just going to use the frame today, and I pop that up with some foam tape so it gives it some dimension and really makes it look like a picture frame, which is going to pull the focus of the scene inward. I set that down carefully and made sure it was on there straight, and then press that down into place. Then I'll bring in my images, and I'm going to start with the largest one, which is the tree house. And I'm going to place that towards the top of my scene, a little towards the left, so that it is accenting that sentiment and just really tying into everything. So I'll just add some liquid glue to the back of that and then get that situated right where I want it. And then I can build my scene around that by adding in my critters. So I'm going to start with the little beaver, and I'm just going to set him down carefully as well because I want to make sure that I have everything placed just right and, you know, nothing kind of covering up too much of one of the other images. So I shifted him slightly to the right so that I could add the badger down in front. And then I'm going to add my fox over on the left-hand side. I really do love using liquid glue to adhere images because it gives you that little bit of time to adjust before everything dries permanent. And then I'll add my tree. This is the smaller of the two in that stamp set. I'm just going to tuck that back behind the first hill and behind the beaver's tail. Since this is a more masculine card, I decided not to add any glitter or embellishments, just to let the coloring shine. So there's another peek at the inside and an up-close look at all of the detail. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. It looks straight out of a storybook to me. If you did like it, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button and leave me a comment down below. I love chatting with you guys. Subscribe to My Favorite Things for more inspiring videos just like these here on screen. Bye-bye.